Chapter 9. Emotions Running Amok. Austen strode across the deck in well-concealed shock. He knew for a fact that Sterling had been below deck since they'd set sail, so he knew for a fact that Sterling knew of the girl's presence. That was as far as his thought process went. Numerous questions were clamouring around, but he purposely cleared his mind of all thoughts. With years of practice, he had perfected this talent. He commanded his brain not to think. And that's exactly what it did. He answered the question a crew member had for him, greeted several others like always as he passed them, and gave out the orders that were called for. Business as usual. He went on to check on their courses and progress, then received a report from the barrelman in the Crow's Nest. There was not a single ship to be seen on the waters this fine day. Everything seemed to be in order, he thought, as he climbed to the upper deck of the ship, took a deep breath, and bellowed in such immense volume that surely even the heavens heard him.
"What the bloody hell, bastard! Goddamn devil and its blasted mother!"
Sterling and Lucas stared up, wide-eyed as Austen entered the cabin, his footsteps the only sound on the entire ship. Sterling saw, quite gratefully, that most of Austen's anger had been expelled with the bellow. "Luke, some rum, please." The boy jumped in response to Austen's brisk request, while Sterling fidgeted under his unrelenting gaze. Lucas placed the bottle and 2 glasses on the table. "Thanks. Luke, why don't you go to see if Poulet needs some help in the galley?" Sterling immediately set to the task of filling the glasses. Once they were alone, and the silence had thickened to the point that it was bendable, Austen's gaze dropped. Why? Sterling downed his first glass of rum. God, he should have told him from the start. "I didn't... She's Delmont's fiancée." He got up and walked to the stove.
"I didn't kidnap them. They are not here on purpose. They followed me thinking I was Delmont."
Austen looked up and their eyes met. He wasn't quite sure if he was angry with Sterling at that moment. As a matter of fact, he wasn't sure of anything, which, in point, was what made him furious. He had always kept his emotions under strict control, but under the circumstances, he couldn't seem to find one to stay still long enough to label. His system had just experienced a great shock. His emotions were overloaded and now all his feelings were jumbled. He had no idea how to react, and his thoughts tumbled around just beyond reach, probably because he didn't have any solid information to analyse. Once he found the reason Julienne was on his ship, everything would fall into place. Bloody Jesus Christ. Not only women aboard my ship, Sterling, but one is a ginger. "A ginger!" he exclaimed, wiping the sweat from his brow. Sterling cringed. He was well aware that redheads were considered the worst luck on a ship, and knew Austen took these superstitions to heart. Austen wasn't easily jolted, and prided himself on his stability, but to blasted hell and back if his heart wasn't beating like a goddamn fornicating rabbit's. Austen's voice was steady as he told Sterling, "Just start from the beginning." "Sylvina, come away from there," Julienne demanded. Sylvina didn't move as she stood staring up at the empty hatch. "Did you see those legs?" Sweet Jesus, did she see those legs? How could she have missed them? But even more distressing to her was that bottom. She had never in her life seen anything so... "That was Captain Austen," Sylvina said with awe. Julienne began to pace. This was all too coincidental. She tried to quell her rising fear, but the harder she tried, the more difficult it became. He was Austen. The pirate Captain Austen. She should never have let him sit with her at the restaurant, she thought frantically, as she climbed onto the pile of throws now known as their bed. A proper young lady would never have allowed that, and would never have been put in a situation such as this. It was a kiss. She had willingly kissed him. by all that's holy. And now he thinks kissing leads to the sex act. She knew that much. It was the particulars of the act itself she wasn't too familiar with. She moved her thoughts onto her death afterward, a more comforting thought. Thrown to the sharks, that would be her fate. Julienne flavoured fish food. "This is so romantic," Sylvina cooed. "Excuse me?" "The notorious pirate Austin kidnapping the one woman who's claimed his heart," Julienne gasped. Her friend didn't comprehend their situation at all. "Sylvina, Austin is a ruthless pirate. A murderer. I most certainly have not claimed his heart. I saw the electricity between you." He smouldered as he looked at you. "No!" She jumped up. "Sylvina, he is a pirate. Don't you see?" She grabbed Sylvina by the shoulders. "He slit a man's throat and pulled out his spine." Sylvina pushed away from her in disgust. "We don't know if that story is true." "They could kill us, Sylvina. No one would ever know. No one would ever find us or know what happened to us. We would just be dead, in the middle of the ocean. They are pirates." It grew silent in the dark room as they deeply contemplated their situation. They were prisoners. Austin strode across the deck, tapping his leg with the wood-handled brush, gold initials shining in the sunlight. He briefly smiled as he remembered the story Sterling relayed about his beloved Toller, and then his brows creased again. Sterling's attempt at redirecting this attention from their problem hadn't worked as well as Sterling had hoped. His rivaling emotions hadn't found their places yet, and he wished to blasted heaven they would sort themselves out soon. His thoughts went back to Jewel. The twinge in his stomach told him that he very likely had a born brat on his hands. He had met her wealthy, doting parents. She had herself proclaimed her position too superior for manual labour, such as a shop owner. She had been brought up in the exact environment that bred born brats were cultivated. But he couldn't simply dismiss her like he had done with countless others. She posed a threat. She knew who he was. She knew several of his personas, as a matter of fact. She could destroy him, not only by identifying him as Captain Austen, but by revealing him as the mastermind behind the Bank of England scheme. He was so close to the end of that venture. One last stop in France, and he would collect the rewards of the plan that had taken him 3 years to construct and execute. He looked down at the brush and tapped his foot against the hatch. He decided he would be calm and see where the situation led. He found Julienne sitting on a crate, a cascade of hair in front of her face. She was trying to run her fingers through the knots and trying even harder to regulate her sudden erratic heartbeat by taking deep, steadying breaths. Peering through the tangle, she saw him standing there, staring at her. "I bought you this," he said, holding out the brush. Bright eyes peered at him as she slid her damp hair back, revealing her face. He approached her with his offering, stopping so close that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. The memory of his warm embrace flooded over her. Glancing up past his tan chest and into those eyes, she again found she couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Her pulse beat furiously. She wished he'd leave. She didn't understand these strange feelings. She knew it must be fright, but oddly, she didn't feel afraid at all. "Sterling tells me you've been down here since we set sail. I'm here to take you on deck." Julienne swallowed hard, straight to the sharks. Austin fidgeted a moment at her silence. Had her mind suffered in the heat? "Why don't you get dressed, and I'll wait for you up top." He gestured to the ladder. Dressed in Sterling's breeches and shirts, the girls proceeded up the steps, exchanging worried glances all the way. The fresh air was startling, and Julienne began to feel lightheaded. Her first reaction to finding her freedom was to run to the rail. It was then the full impact of their dilemma hit her. Water. That's all that was around her for as far as she could see. They were floating around somewhere in the vast ocean. Nothing but the glassy blackness of the sinister water met her eyes wherever they ventured. The sun wasn't even to be seen in the dying light of the day, and the darkening sky added to the illusion of the never-ending ocean. There was no place to go. There was no escape. She was a true prisoner, subject to the cutthroat Captain Austen's every whim. She felt minuscule in a vast universe, vulnerable and helpless. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Austen said, cutting into her thoughts. "Who?" she asked quietly. "The sea." She looked back over the water. She hadn't seen it as beautiful. She saw it as frightening. "I'll have one of the men bring your things up to the cabin." She looked to Sylvina. Up where? To what cabin? Surely he didn't mean to his cabin.
She should never have kissed him.
One kiss did not mean she would willingly go to his bed. He was gesturing to the men to go back to work. "What do you mean?" she asked, and suddenly didn't want to know the answer. "Where are we going? When will we arrive?" she asked, trying to act unaffected by her situation. He watched his men. He was unsure how to answer. He hadn't decided what their next destination would be. "We will speak of that later." He guarded his emotions as he watched the wind lift her long tresses away from her perfect, creamy white face. She looked deep into his eyes. He would not tell her. What did that mean? Did he not want to say because he had no intention of letting them live that long? Did he plan on killing them while at sea? Well, she simply wouldn't let him. There was ever a time for her to be strong. It was now. It was time to take control of the situation. "I demand to know where you are taking us." God damn it. He knew it. A born brat. He would not stand for it. Not one breath of it. She could act the princess with her beaux back in England, but not with him. He grew a good 2 inches taller than his previous dance, and his eyes took on a demonic glow as he stared down at her. Julienne heard Sylvina's quick intake of breath as she herself stood awed by the transformation. "By all that's holy, you may demand nothing from me." Though his voice was soft, she sensed a death sentence in it. Oh, her mind acknowledged. But she mustn't surrender. She couldn't just let him move her things to his room as easily as he'd ordered raspberry ice at the Cheshire. How could she willingly give in to his pirate commands? How absurd! She heard him whisper an oath beneath his breath before he turned back to her. "You may get off your high horse, Highness. Titles mean nothing on this ship." She had an urge to glance around this ship he spoke of, but she couldn't tear her eyes from him. They were so dark, so arrogantly in control of everything around him. "I'm not on a high horse," she said feebly. "That's not showing him a fight." He nodded. "As long as you understand your position." Oh my sweet Jesus Lord above, what did that mean? What was her position? What did she understand? What did he intend to do? Bloody hell. He hated the idea of her being the born brat he knew her to be. But for the love of bloody Christ, he couldn't figure out why it should bother him so. "Listen to me," he said, stepping closer to tower over her. She marvelled at the way the setting sun shone from behind him, illuminating the edges of those dark curls like a powerful sea god. "The one thing I will not tolerate aboard my ship is the rantings and ravings of a spoiled princess. I am captain of this ship, not a nanny. I haven't the time nor the patience for such nonsense. You are a mere person here. Your title, for the duration of this trip, is devoid of any value. I am captain here, and by God's bloody teeth, you will obey me." Her eyes flashed purple darts before she reached up and smacked him in the head. He jerked back, his eyes wide in surprise. No woman had ever successfully hit him before. Many a hand had flown to strike that handsome face, but he had always interceded with ease. He stood there, at a complete loss.
You, she sputtered. Filthy, savage pig! I don't care who you are. In my presence, you will not use our Lord's name in any oath.
Oh my God, Sylvina breathed. What? He demanded in disbelief.
You heard me. You heard me. Or is deafness also a prerequisite for the feeble-minded these days? In that case, I will repeat. Degrading our Lord's name is unacceptable.
Sylvina crossed herself, while Austen stood watching Julienne in amazement. He ran his hand through his hair. For the blood of Christ, have you not heard a word I said? She smacked him again. You're not listening to me. He stood back, stunned. Sylvina held Julienne's arm. I am so sorry, Captain Sir. She hasn't eaten yet, and she gets a bit ornery when she's hungry, you see. He watched the anger in the purple pools before him and ran the backs of his fingers beneath his ear. This was not what he had been expecting. He was used to one or two reactions from women. They either cowered under his intimidating stare, or they tried to seduce him. That was life. That was how the woman he associated with had been created. She was certainly not cowering, and yet he had never encountered this particular form of seduction either. He shook his head. He would push this to the back of his mind until he had time to study it further. Julienne's anger faded under his intense scrutiny. How could she stay angry at a face like that? Had she actually hit him? Twice. He looked as if he was about to say something, then changed his mind. Instead, he glanced at Sylvina, who sank back against the rail. Slowly, he turned away from them, deep in thought, and stalked away across the deck. He stopped and faced his crew.
No one go near them,
he bellowed. His thoughts were a jumbled mess again, and he despised himself for his lack of control. He latched on to the one clear picture in his mind. She had hit him, and in front of the crew. Sterling jumped from Austen's bunk when the door flung open. What were you thinking? Austen barked. You must have picked the most impossible woman on this earth. How hard did you have to search? He stalked through the cabin and poured himself a glass of rum, downing it in one gulp. He went toward his bunk and focused on the crossed swords attached to the wall. He ran his hand through his black locks. He didn't want to yell at his friend. He wanted to be alone to think. A savage, for Christ's sake! Sterling got the message loud and clear and crept from the room.
Julienne's eyes wandered around their new cabin. She listened to Sylvina and Sterling's awkward conversation as they spoke about the sea and how to predict the weather.
The cabin was fairly large, with a table along the back wall and a large bunk along the left wall. A thick beam ran the width of the ceiling from which a lantern hung, while others had been fixed to the walls. She relaxed as she observed how Sylvina was accepting their predicament and trying to make the best of it. Julienne silently praised Sterling for being so accommodating. Why was Sterling so easy to get along with, yet his captain? What was it her mother once said? From the demented minds of men comes catastrophe. She liked the sound of that. That's what Austen was. Demented. Make sure you lock this door when I leave. I'll be back in the morning. Do not leave this room. With that, Sterling closed the door firmly behind him. He dreaded the thought of facing Austen, so instead decided to go to the helm and talk to Josh about the map. The girls slept through the day and the night, luxuriating in the comfort of a real mattress. The air in their new room, though still hot, was scented with sea salt. Julienne awoke first, with the lingering remnants of her dream. The details floated just beyond reach. It was her wedding day. Yes, everyone had attended. Her family, her friends from finishing school, all the servants, even Grandmama, who had passed away when Julienne was a little girl. She was very happy. The church was lit with candles. Grandpapa was crying tears of joy. But when she approached the altar, Delmont was barefoot, not at all like Delmont. Also, his shirt was untucked, and his hair was darker, and his eyes. When the dream became clearer in her mind, she quickly swept it away and hopped from the bed. No, 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 no. It continued to haunt her as she walked about the cabin, trying to think of other subjects to occupy her mind. Alas, those eyes and soft curls kept finding their way back into her thoughts. She stamped her foot, making the task of pacing clumsy. What a fool he is! Not only does he make my days miserable, now he even ruins my sleep. What is his reasoning? The least he could do is tell me his plans for me. Ha! I can imagine being the beast he is. He'll find out how a spoiled little snip. What are you mumbling about? Sylvina asked, sitting up in the bed. Julienne hadn't realised she was talking aloud. I have to get out of here. Let's get some air. We have to wait until Sterling comes. He'll be here soon and will take us on deck. I want to go now. I need some air. Jewel, what is the matter with you this morning? Are you hungry? Do you need food? Julienne snorted. No, I don't need food, Sylvina. Food is not the answer to everything. A biscuit does not cure a cold, nor a slab of beef a toothache. Well, I never thought they did, Sylvina mumbled. I'm going down below to get my jewelry from the hiding place before the rats eat it. If Sterling comes, tell him I fell overboard. Jewel. But before she could finish her protest, Julienne was out the door. The hatch was open when Julienne arrived, and she debated daring a jump as Austen had. If he could do it, she was sure it must be a simple task. She heard a dull thump from below in the hold. She didn't move, and wondered if she should have taken Sterling's advice and not strayed from her room. Her father had told her many stories of barbarian pirates like these men. She imagined meeting up with a fat, drooling derelict so drunk and grimy that the smell would make her gag. Forcing her feet back in the direction of her cabin, she heard a second thump. Looking down, she could only see the floor below. Footsteps. Her heart began to pound. Whoever it was knew she was there and was coming for her. He would drag her down into that hole with him where her screams couldn't be heard.
She remembered the knives she had seen many of the crew carry. Whoever was coming for her would slit her throat and rip out her spine.
Austen's shiny black head crossed the floor beneath the hatch. She calmed immediately. Descending a few steps cautiously so as not to be discovered, she perched secretly on the highest rung, which still allowed her a view of the man below. Something in her began to stir as she watched him cool a target. Right beam knot, and spin before flinging the blade with fluent precision to the target's centre. Each motion was deliberate. His voice controlled, identifying a target, spinning, flinging the blade. Carefully, so as not to draw his attention, she snuck down another step. Third rung. Spin, fling. Julienne's face went white as she felt the reverberation of the blade stab the wood beneath her foot.
God's teeth! What the hell are you doing?
He shouted as he rushed toward her. Get down from there. She stared at the knife beneath her foot in astonishment. That knife could have ended her life. Get down. Now, he ordered. He grabbed her roughly by the shoulders, his heart hammering within him as images flashed through his mind. His knife slicing into one body after another and then another. At great speed, he saw dozens of faces frozen in shock, the expressions that came with the realization of imminent death. An emotion he'd seen many times in his lifetime from friends and foe alike. He looked down into Julienne's face, knowing how close she had come to being added to that list. He could have been holding her lifeless body at that very moment. Don't you ever disobey me again. Do you hear me? Good Lord above, she could have been killed. What would happen to Sylvina if she were to die? What about her parents? Delmont? They would never know. How could she live the perfect life she had been meticulously planning out for years if she were dead? Let go of me! She jerked away from the painful grip he had on her. Tension stormed between them. She could feel his anger, his power in the air. It was a dangerous power she should think deeply on before provoking. She tore her eyes away and scurried back up the ladder to safety. Austen exhaled heavily, only then realizing he had been holding his breath.